let's put it in this respect, if we saw something educational on TikTok, would we respond to that more positively than if we were just to see that same piece of information in a textbook?
Okay, right, yeah, no, I like
I'm put
this.
in a really conflicting situation right now, because everything that I've thought up until this point is social media is bad for you, and it is. I understand all the arguments are still valid, but this explains why it can also potentially be good for you.
It's just so obvious that I feel like to address an issue like this, but to look at it from the respect of science and how this could kind of influence your brain to get you in that trap to just mindlessly scroll away. This is the real reason. I'm glad you've addressed it like the way that you have, so viewers can actually conceptualize, okay, this is what's really happening behind the scenes. When I'm mindlessly scrolling away, why am I still getting that dopamine hit? Why do I still feel so good about myself?
When you're under a stressful scenario, are you better at receiving bad news and acting on it? That's the question that both myself and Joseph are going to be answering today on the JXB pod. And this is not, no, if you're wondering, a spotlight story edition. This is just us talking more about student issues and things that you guys can relate to. So like I said before, we are going to be talking about the relationship between bad news and stressful situations, something that you guys are experiencing every day, and not by chance. It's because we understand any student at this point would always be experiencing some form of stress. So without me waffling on too much, I've actually prepared some slides for these, and I'm going to share that, and we're just going to be going through it and having a discussion on what's on it. So give me 1 second. Okay, well, before we get into any of that, how have you been today?
I've been good, thanks for asking you.
Okay, vice versa, yes, very vice versa. Well, just bear in mind, when I'm sharing these slides, I cannot see you, so I can't see when you're laughing. I can't see your facial expression. Okay, alright, cool. So, bad news and stress. The question that we're going to be answering today, the question that we will be leading off from, is, are we better at processing information and using it when we are under stress? Just to get started though, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about jobs that can vary in stress. Now, we can start off with jobs, Joseph, but we can also go off with scenarios when we're under stress and just talk about personal experiences that we have had as students and as students that we experience every day. So do you want to get started and just give a couple off the top of your head?
Of course, I think it's personally, from working in a pharmacy, of course, incredibly stressful environment, particularly when I used to work at Lloyd's Pharmacy. Now that it's now collapsed, and so has my book. For obvious reasons, of course, I think with respect to Lloyd's Pharmacy, as good as it was, there were so many flaws with how that they were conducting business. And something that I could notably just take account of is how understaffed we were to be working in the pharmacy. I would be even, personally by myself with a locum pharmacist, and it would just be me at the front and then trying to help out with dispensing, as well as trying to guide the pharmacist in the dispensing software. So there was so much going on that day, and it wasn't just that day alone, it was so many other days like that, where I'd be put in such difficult situations, and then ultimately, I could ultimately just say that, I want to take a break. Although, I am legally permitted to take a break, it's not appropriate, particularly in the midst of serving a multitude of patients who are coming there to pick up their medications, to say that I want to have a break to the locum pharmacist that has come here for the first time on shift. It's not appropriate. So because of that, I have had to refrain from taking breaks, toilet breaks, and then just had to just plow through it and just work through it. And it's not a nice environment to ultimately work in, and therefore they're ultimately added towards like tension headaches, which I had towards the end of the shift. So I'd be coming out at the end of the shift where all my muscles around my neck would be all tensed up, along with the scalenes around here, and then I'd have what's known as tension headaches, and I'd just be so knocked out from such quite a stressful day, I'd say. Ultimately, dealing with complaints, rude customers, and then ultimately just having to do regular procedures throughout the day.
Okay.
It would be difficult. It would be difficult. And what about you? What about you, Vish? I'm sure you've had your fair share of stories.
Yes, leading on the jobs aspect, when I was working in the GP, I didn't have that much of stress because I wasn't dealing with patients as much one-on-one. But I guess when I was talking to people over the phone, talking to patients over the phone, there was a stress factor involved when they asked me questions that I wasn't too familiar with. And I was in the back of my mind thinking, okay, what can I answer with? What's the appropriate answer to give them? Not necessarily the correct answer to their question, but just because most of the time the questions that they ask, I am not permitted to give them an answer because it would be medical related. So although now when I look back on it, I know half the time I should have just said, oh, I'm not a medically qualified GP practitioner. The P stands for practitioner. I'm not medically qualified, so I can't give you an answer. I should have said that. Some scenarios when I was just thrown into the job, I wasn't sure what to say and I probably gave the wrong answer. So that's, in terms of work that I have experienced myself, that's the only stressful side I can see of it. But as a student, as you know as well, Joseph, we're constantly put under the stress of exams, all sort of projects,
Of
or
course,
just daily homework or schoolwork, or when there's always that, I call it lingering stress of when to revise. It's a form of procrastination, but you have to revise at some point, but you end up leaving it until the last 3 weeks or 4 weeks leading up to the exams. That's also a form of stress as well. So I think general things like that. But if you can widen it up to potentially what type of jobs would experience stress, not necessarily that we have experienced, but just generally speaking. You mentioned dispensing, pharmacy dispenser. That's, I think going from that, we can just say any medical job, so any form of a doctor,
100%.
nurse, pharmacist, that's going to come with a lot of stress as well. Is there anything else you can think of if we're talking from that
I know
respect?
you've kind of already said medical jobs, but I think there's something that's been incredibly prevalent over these past few months in relation to strikes in particular. I think a big shout out needs to go out to all the junior doctors here, because you imagine you've just done your F1, F2, you're just thrown in the deep end, or even while you're doing your F1, F2, you're already thrown in the deep end as it is. It's crazy to think the kind of responsibility that you are given as soon as you leave med school, because to think that med school does not prepare you for what life is like within the NHS, and that's scary because it's like promising a false reality, and then then get chucked in the deep end, and then all full-fledged you have exams that you need to pay for, registration, like your CPDs, this, that, and the other. There are so many things that you're continually trying to balance along with that, and as well as that, you'll be having to travel towards different rotations that you will be doing every other month as well. So there's so much cost behind training to be a doctor, but they're just not fairly compensated in the work that they do, and therefore it can lead to stress.
Just leading on from that, just one more point I wanted to talk about is, yes, we're saying the medical line, but every single job has a degree of stress involved in it. And because I got all of this from an article, one particular job that was mentioned was firemen or firefighters, to be more broad and inclusive. The Firemen Experiment, this was carried out on firemen in a particular department. And what's happened was that they were asked to estimate the likelihood of experiencing 40 aversive events in their life. And these range from things like scams to car incidents, car accidents, theft, all of the above. They were asked to predict the likelihood of that event happening. And then what would happen is that they would either be given good news, that it's lower, or bad news, in reality it's actually higher than what they had predicted. And what they changed, if you like, the independent variable, was the conditions that they were put under, or the situations that they were put under. So some of the situations would be stress related and some would be no stress involved. And what they found is when they were stressed and when they were told these aversive events and given the bad news, they became very hyper vigilant.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
when they were told the good news, they were almost ignorant towards it. So they prioritized the bad news over the good news, if you like.
Yeah.
And they thought, okay, you've told me the bad news. I'm already stressed. You've just made me even more stressed. Ignoring the good news, I'm going to focus on the bad news, and we are going to try and find a way around it. That's what they were doing mentally. And although these events that they put them under aren't really relatable to us as students, we could right now just take a little spin on that. So, Joseph, if I were to ask you a question, just to see how you would handle it.
Go on.
If you were put in a situation where you had to, I don't know, let's say choose between two different unis. You'd been accepted, let's say, into two of your favorite unis, right?
Oh wow. Okay. Right.
And
Yeah.
you had to choose between one of the two. Would you say that's a fairly stressful event?
If we could just rephrase that slightly, let's say two favorite pharmaceutical companies. Let's say
Okay, go on.
GSK
Yeah, because it's more
and
relatable.
Pfizer. Yeah, let's do it like that
Okay.
because I've already got the acceptance from GSK.
Okay, so let's say you had to choose between the two,
Two pharmaceutical companies. All right. Yeah.
and let's say the point in time when that happens
Yeah.
to you, you have already got a car,
Okay.
and then
yeah.
I come and tell you when you're already in that stressful situation that
Right.
I have just taken your windshield off, I've driven and I've crashed into your car. What would
Yeah.
your initial reaction be?
I don't
know it's
think
hard
it
to-
would. Yeah, it's difficult to visualize in that position because you
Yeah.
have so much going on. Cortisol shoots. Everything. I think particularly in that situation, it would be, of course, difficult to put myself in that position right now. But to think of it, if I were to already be shocked with such gratitude in having that sort of thing go on, to then compensate it with for you to then crash my vehicle, I would most likely brush it off, to be honest. I wouldn't think that much of it, as opposed to hypothetically if I'd be more worried about you than the car. Do you get what I mean?
Okay, yes, but that's because you know me, and of course I'm your friend. But
Okay.
I'm talking about the
I say
actual.
my car got broken into, yeah?
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Let's go for that.
For that situation, I would think that for such a good thing to come my way in that instant, and then for it to then get compensated by a bad thing, I wouldn't necessarily think much of it because I'm already in such an elevated state of mind. You get what I mean?
Yes.
Fairly stressed out, and nothing can really top that high that I'm already getting at this point.
Yes.
So for something like as menial as my car getting broken into, in that point in time, I don't think it would be it wouldn't affect me as much as it would do if, say, for example, I was just doing work and then for something like that to happen.
That's great because you've just made the point that I was trying to get across, and that is when you're already in a stressful situation, your level of priority changes, and the main factor that's causing that stress, that would be at the top of your priority list. So anything else that is thrown your way, bad or good, will always go beneath that number one spot, which means that you're always hyper focusing on whatever's causing you the most amount of stress all the time in that given situation. And because of that, you have a less of a reaction towards any potential bad news that is considered not as important at that point in time. It's really hard to explain because it's all subjective, because there's hundreds and thousands of different situations and scenarios that you could come across. A second one, this was the Undergraduate Experiment.
Okay.
This is slightly different, and it's the point that I'm trying to make with this is going to be slightly different, but same sort of idea. And here, different undergrads were told that they would have to give a surprise public speech to a judging panel, which would be recorded and put online. And this caused a spike in their cortisol levels. Now, Joseph mentioned this very briefly before, and I've also given a small definition in the slide, and that is a steroid hormone produced by adrenal glands caused by fluctuation in stress. Now, just because, Joseph, you would probably have much more experience in studying cortisol levels. Is there anything else you know about cortisol and its responsibility or its relationship to stress?
Yeah, of course. There's going to be a direct correlation between the two. It's like as if you were to be put in a situation like a fight or flight, and your hormones are going to be just released in that instant. But it also goes to mention, certain other things that are also going on within our body system, because we also have what's known as corticotrophin-releasing hormone. And this is pretty much a regulator in our hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, HPA. I don't know if those who do, or understand, anatomy, that's specifically what's going on. And that's ultimately what your main body's response to the stress is ultimately going to be. It's going to be releasing that CRH, the corticotrophin releasing hormone. But as well as this, the stress also induces a hypothalamic production of the CRH, which then causes the activation of the CRH receptor in the anterior pituitary to then stimulate of what's known as adrenocorticotrophic hormone. And it will also release other hormones as well, but not to go too much in depth to it, which I already kind of have. But ACTH, adrenocorticotrophic hormone, then stimulates the production and secretion of cortisol or corticosterone by the adrenal cortex ultimately. And therefore, like we have what's going on here, is that response that we have, that kind of stressful response, which will then induce, all sorts of symptoms of stress that we have, which will be elevated blood pressure, heart rate, sweating, all these, that's only a few to mention. But that's a bit of a background as to kind of like what's exactly going on with respect to the anatomy and physiology in that regard.
Okay, great. That actually clears up a lot, because the variety of points that you made there, quite a few went over my head when you were talking about it. But the variety of points that you made there, no, that's only because I'm not at that level where I understand most.
Soon enough. You'll be succeeding me, Yash. Okay,
We'll see.
Mr. Med School.
Okay. Not yet.
Look how humble my man is. Wow.
No, I'm just.
Sorry,
okay.
I just want to say that the humility is just crazy.
Some of the points or all of the points that you made are actually all relevant to everything that we will be talking about. So that's a little hint. But just coming back to this experiment, when this caused a spike in their cortisol levels, and when they were subsequently told about bad news, in this case it was rates of disease spreading and violence, to be supposedly included in the speech that they're preparing for, they were able to take in a lot more information and gain a much better understanding of what they needed to include, and ended up delivering, I don't know if they actually delivered it or not, but they ended up, like I said, having a much better understanding and preparing a much better speech, let's say that, compared to the control group. Yeah. Now I wanted to make this point because there is a saying, and that saying is that you work much better when you're under stress.
Oh,
Joseph, how true do you think that is?
I cannot describe how closely I can relate with what you've just said, because it's one thing to, let me just put this out there for you guys just to conceptualize and understand. It's one thing for a lecturer to say that, okay, our deadline date is going to be in the next 3 months. I tell you right now for a fact, no one there within the lecture theatre is not going to get started on that assignment up until a good month or a few weeks before the deadline. And that's just only because of our innate nature of just leaving things to the last minute. It's not. Look, of course, there are going to be a few students here and there who are, of course, going to jump on the assignment and get it done then and there, of course. But for the vast majority, I can just state as a fact, it is going to be the case where workload is going to dramatically increase. We have all different ways of time management strategies, and to think that something is 3 months ahead or down the line, it's going to be at the bottom of your priority list, because you're going to have things that you're going to want to do which are far more prevalent and pressing issues that you're going to want to have to tick off on your to-do list. And therefore, there is something that I kind of also want to kind of jump on or just say about APJ Abdul Kalam, if you're happy for me to do so.
Please, yeah.
Yeah. And would I be correct in saying he was a Prime Minister of India?
Yes, he was,
Yeah, and do you remember specifically what Prime Minister he was?
Well, he was much more than that, because I remember they've made a book about him, because he was he's also into engineering. Yes. And you told me something very interesting that I think you're going to enlighten the rest of us with.
Of course. just a bit of a background on who APJ Abdul Kalam is. He is an Indian aerospace scientist and statesman who served the 11th president of India between 2002 to 2007. He was born in Tamil Nadu, so he is from my ends, and it's good to see the representation that we have. Of course, he's Indian, but he's from Tamil Nadu. But I like that. I like the fact he's from Tamil Nadu. But yeah, there is a specific story which kind of caught my eye because it kind of, I've read quite a few of APJ Abdul Kalam's books actually, and this specific passage I remember reading early on, and this was, if you don't mind me saying, viewers, are you happy for me to read out this extract?
Please.
Yeah, so Kalam moved to Madras in 1955 to study aerospace engineering in Madras Institute of Technology, arguably one of the most underrated universities in the world. I would go as far as to say it's better than MIT in America.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Massachusetts Information Technology or something. Institute of Technology. While Kalam was working on a senior class project, the dean was dissatisfied with his lack of progress and threatened to revoke his scholarship unless the project was finished within the next 3 days, right? So Kalam met the deadline, impressing the dean, who later said to him, "I was putting you under stress and asking you to meet a difficult deadline." And therefore, when you are put in the situation of having such a monumentous task or goal within the next few days, the amount of surge and motivation required to actually, meet that cutoff is crazy. Having that burst of focus and energy to do the deadline, it's ridiculous because you're always thinking about the consequences that would come out of it, in the fact that, say, if you didn't meet the deadline, what would happen? What are the repercussions if you don't do this? So you're always continually thinking at the back of your mind. It's
Yes.
like the consequences of failure, the consequences
Yes.
of failing, maybe what may hold you back in the future. So therefore, you're going to make sure you pull out every single weapon out of the hat. Now, that's an analogy I just come out from the top of my head, but just
It's a really good one.
thank you very much. I think there's a correct analogy that I should have been saying, but
That's all right. That works. It works.
It works. It works. That's correct. But the main point I'm really trying to get across to you guys is the fact that you will exhaust all your possible options to make sure you get that assignment done. And I say that for a
Yes.
fact. Being put in that position in the past, I never want to ever be put in that position ever again. But it's inevitable. Things happen, events come up, and you're ultimately going to have to be put in positions where you have to be more resourceful. And therefore,
Yeah.
meeting a tight deadline is inevitable. So, yeah.
Great. Wow. That ties in. Let me just say that side was an amazing side, because that ties in
Wow.
exactly with what you were saying. And although we have said repeatedly that stress is bad for health, and it is, too much stress is not good. This is an example of you performing the best when you're under stress, and I'm sure this is true for everyone, and I'm sure most students have experienced this, where they are staying up late night completing a project or completing some slides. You're working best when you are staying up when you're under that stressful experience, because your everything is focused on completing
100%.
it to the best of your ability. That being said, it is actually better to split it
Of
apart
course.
over
Yeah.
weeks, or if you don't have weeks and days, because that way you're ensuring that you're still producing the best ability. You're still producing the best work to your ability, but also you're not getting all those side effects of the health impacts and whatnot.
Exactly.
But yeah, moving on. This was just the explanation to everything that we've already gone over this, so we can just quickly go over this just so we get a better understanding of what I've actually written. And that was, when I was researching this, I wanted to look for an explanation of why both of these phenomenons occur. So why, when we're under stressful situation, we are better at receiving bad news, and why, when we're under stressful conditions, we are actually more productive, if you like, and we perform better in tasks. Well, it was all because of something called prediction error, and this is reliant on dopamine. And what happens is that when you're under a stressful situation, you get the function of dopamine is altered by another molecule, and Joseph mentioned this, and if I can say the name correctly, it was corticotrophin-releasing factor. And this molecule, it changes how you react to stimulants around you, I should say. and it can lead to a boost in learning. Now that surprised me, because initially when I read this, I thought, okay, if you're really stressed, how can that lead you on to learning much better? But then when I read on and I did further research, it sort of made sense. And to try to explain it to you guys, I'm going to have to go way back to when cavemen existed. And I actually don't have the slides, so I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second so that Joseph and I can have a conversation. I can actually see him. So as I said before, we're going to have to go right back to the caveman era. And as we know, and as is depicted in movies and documentaries and whatnot, cavemen were constantly surrounded by danger. So things like predators constantly around them. And what this meant is that they were always under stress. They were always placed in a situation where they couldn't think about anything else other than the predators that were coming to eat them, to put it literally. And what this meant was that if we go back to what I said before, where stress can actually lead to an increase in your ability to learn, if they're placed around all of these predators and they're constantly under stress, then they were able to learn from their mistakes and also just learn in general what is safe for them and what is best for them to do. And this led to increased ability to adapt. And this is what made sense, and that is that I've heard it quite a few times, and I always thought, how is that true? Now I sort of realized it, and that was that when we were cavemen, the rate at which we were adapting and evolving was the highest out of everything else, out of all the other times that we've been alive as a race. That is because we were constantly put under stress and we were constantly learning from our mistakes and constantly evolving. So that's just the link that I wanted to make and give like a bit of an insight into it. What's your take on that?
Now, that's very interesting to also think that also would I be also correct in saying that around that time as well, through them discovering fire, they would also be able to now cook the meat that they had.
Exactly.
So the animals that they had now, been able to capture, they would now be effectively able to cook the meat, and therefore, more effectively be able to digest the meat that they now have. More protein-rich resources, and ultimately allowing the Homo sapiens to supersede as a race, and therefore, you have Neanderthals who then eventually died off as well. I think that was also cohabiting at the same time as well. But then you have Homo sapiens.
Yeah, because they were constantly on high alert. Because of that, and because of them being able to take these risks and being like, oh, what if we do this? What if we do that? Because they were able to learn much quicker, we are able to do half the things that we can do right now. So it's sort of like a blessing that all of this happened.
Yeah.
And it was quite interesting to me to see how with what we're talking about right now, such a niche in a psychological topic can be related to something so large scale and globally changing, if that makes any sense whatsoever. Anyway, if we come back to the real world, this is what just blew my mind. Okay, when I was
all right, I'm ready for it. Go on.
And just this, I thought we could talk about this before we get into another topic. I don't know if you want to get into that. That was social media.
Right.
Now, I'm not sure if I have slides on this or not, but I think we can just talk about it because we've talked about it hundreds of times before. I don't think we need slides on it. And that was when you view a post on social media, you are highly influenced by whatever it is you see. And I think this is something we can all agree on, right, Joe?
100%.
You can agree that if we see a positive post, like something uplifting or hopeful, we suddenly feel the urge to do something productive. So if we see a post saying, this guy just started a side business and earned $1 million in a day, we're like, oh wait, I need to do that piece of homework. I need to get started on that. You automatically get the same vibe that we see on screen.
Well, you get your David Goggins motivational video and you're like, oh
exactly,
my gosh, what am I doing sitting around just scrolling away mindlessly? I need to be like David Goggins, 4 a.m. runs. Who's going to carry dogs, who's going to carry clothes, this, that and the other.
That is, and I just realized I do have a slide on this, so I'm going to very quickly share it.
Go on.
Okay, so it actually turns out I do have a slide on this, and this is social media and the link to stress. So as you can see here, I already said it, but if you observe a more positive post, then you're likely to feel more positive and post more positive things, do more positive things. You get the idea.
Yeah.
But what also interested me was the fact that when you repeatedly check your phone, it's related to you being stressed in some way or another.
Ooh.
And this is the
How
fact.
interesting.
I'm saying all of this is really interesting, but this is what blew my mind. That if we link it back to the whole cavemen era, right?
Yeah.
The main stimulant then were these predators. That was what was promoting this physiological reaction to what was going on. That's what caused them to respond in these crazy ways that we can't even begin to understand now, but what's ultimately led to evolution. That stimulant, i.e. the predators around them, the danger around them, nowadays is being replaced by a tweet or a post. So they are saying that we have the same reaction towards predators and genuine dangers than that we have towards posts and tweets that we see on social media. And they did a experiment on this, and they found that posting can lead to a higher pulse rate, more sweating, and an increase in pupil size compared to normal day-to-day activity. And all of this has a direct correlation with obviously stress levels and cortisol levels. And honestly, when I found this out, I was just like, this definitely has to be something we talk about on the pod, because the link that this made to everything that we've talked about previously, it almost opened my mind up, opened my eyes to what's actually happening.
I feel like it opened an unlocked door, a locked door, which was right in front of us. Do you get what I mean? As in, like, it's just so obvious that I feel like to address an issue like this, but to look at it from the respect of science and how this could kind of influence your brain to get you in that trap to just mindlessly scroll away. This is the real reason. I'm glad you've addressed it like the way that you have, so viewers can actually conceptualize, okay, this is what's really happening behind the scenes. When I'm mindlessly scrolling away, why am I still getting that dopamine hit? Why do I still feel so good about myself? It's part and part due to our attention span just slowly reducing, but it's also part and part due to, evolutionary adaptations, and we can see compensations in that regard, and why you have been so stuck to your phone with respect to that. But wow, Vio.
Now, I just wanted to end not end today's pod, because this leads on to a discussion almost, but just end the slides that I've made with this. Now, I sort of gleamed over it because this sort of confused me when I first saw it. What I just said, where we are being faced with the same reaction towards posts as we had towards predators. Now, if we go back, I said that when we are faced with all these predators and whatnot, when we were cavemen, that led to high evolutionary rate, and we were able to learn much quicker and adapt much better, and everything was positive, everything was amazing. And all of that is being linked to social media now. Does that mean that when we constantly use social media and watch all these posts, that we are actually increasing our ability to learn? We are stimulating ourselves, so we're actually adapting? Are we actually evolving in that sense?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I don't know. It's just a question I'm putting up because I genuinely don't know the answer to this, and it seems quite contradictory to what we've always been saying. Our social media is bad. Social media is not good for you. It's not going to help you in any way. But this seems to turn that argument on its head using the same logic that we've just touched on.
Wow. You kind of really got me thinking about this already. Wow, I'm kind of speechless.
Do you not have any opinion on this?
Well, it's difficult to think of how ways in which social media, we've always kind of focused it on the realm of the negative side, but to see it from a positive perspective, especially now in this day and age, it's for me to just process the grenade that you just kind of just dropped on me. Wow. Grenade. Yeah, I'm just still trying to just take it in. Better at processing information. Do you mind just quickly expanding briefly what you mean by better process.
Do you mean, I guess we could talk while we do this. Do you mean explaining how I made that crazy
Yeah, how
link?
you came to that conclusion? Yeah, because
Okay.
that's very interesting.
So if we go back, I did say that when we were cavemen, we were surrounded by danger, right? All these predators.
Right.
That meant that we were constantly on high alert. We were constantly under these stressful situations. And what we
Right.
said throughout today's episode is that when you're under stressful situations, you're
Mm.
better at taking in bad news, and you're better at learning things when you're given like a big workload, right?
Yeah.
That meant that cavemen at that time were better at adapting and learning from their mistakes, trying new things. Like you said with the cooking meat. If they didn't try that back then we probably wouldn't have discovered it until centuries later on, or millennia.
To also work in a team collectively, as opposed to
exactly, yeah. So
and the
survive.
survival.
They needed it to survive at that point. And then I just told you a couple minutes ago that the stimulants of these predators. So these predators were being compared to social media posts right now. So when they saw the predators back then, they were like, "Oh, I'm very stressed." I'm very stressed. What can I do? Weighing up their options, they're learning, they're constantly thinking about how to solve an issue.
Yeah.
And now when you see a post, you're getting a similar response where they are put under a stressful situation, so they are under stress constantly now.
Yeah.
Does that mean that when we are watching posts, therefore, and we are under that stressful situation, when we are watching these posts or tweets or whatever it is on social media, that at that point in time we actually have an increased ability to learn? So does that mean that if we were, let's put it in this respect, if we saw something educational on TikTok, would we respond to that more positively than if we were just to see that same piece of information in a textbook?
I see. Okay. Right. Yeah. No, I like this. I really like the way that you've gone about this. So it's good that you rationalize it to both myself and audience. And I think it could go one or two ways. One way in that I feel like, of course, the variable would be the person in and of itself. Would they be more inclined to take action, or would they be more inclined to take a step back? Are they less likely to take action? I think it's more based on the person, their personality, what the person is really getting out of the time that they have, number one, the situation that they are in, and really, I guess, what their personality is really made up of. I feel like you and I are both, we're quite similar on that realm, where if we were to come across a post, which I guess, either whether that would be respect to it being educational or kind of allows for, I guess, further research or insight that we kind of want to develop on, I feel like we would take action. And I would see myself sometimes also do so, whether that would be even putting the phone down. I feel like being able to better manage the stress that we have at our hand, this is the stress ultimately, not the dog, but, what it's ultimately inducing. But again, I feel like very controversial the way that you've kind of came to that conclusion, but love it. I love how you phrased it as well.
See, I that's what I said, because I can't see, I'm put in a really conflicting situation right now, because everything that I've thought up until this point is social media is bad for you, and it is. I understand. All the arguments are still valid, but this explains why it can also potentially be good for you. And if you sort of stay out of the dark side of it, then I think, and you're using it in moderation, I think it could actually be of good use to you based on what we've seen today.
Exactly.
So I think that would be a good place to leave it. If you have any thoughts, you know what to do, just let us know. And I should have said this right at the start, but I just realized that people listening on Spotify, because I can't upload the video version of this, you wouldn't have been able to see the slides. So maybe at some point, this might be a little hint, Joseph, but maybe at some point you can see the see the slides at some point. But I'll leave it at that, because nothing's finalized yet.
Yeah, definitely.
But
thank you so much for watching.
I enjoyed this discussion.
Definitely, yes. It's very different, and Viyash, big thank you to you for carrying today's podcast. All that research and effort they had put into this presentation, incredibly insightful. I really enjoyed, kind of like firsthand seeing the kind of work that you've developed. And very, very excited for what the future holds. for how you continue to develop and deliver these sorts of beautiful presentations. So yeah, very
Okay,
excited.
thank you. Thank you for your waffling piece of advice. I'll see you in the next one.
I'm finished.
All right, see you, man.
I'm dead. Recess.